Good afternoon, everyone. This is Roger Millar. I'm the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Washington and the chair of AASHTO's Special Committee on Freight. The purpose of today's webinar is to let you know about our draft strategic plan and conclude the process of getting input from members of the committee. We'll also be talking a little bit about upcoming events. Next slide. So again, I'm Roger Millar. I'm the Secretary of Transportation. The committee's Vice Chair, Carolyn Mays, is also on the line. Carolyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Caroline Mays with the Texas Department of Transportation. I serve as the Freight and International Trade Section Director, and I serve as the Vice Chair for the Special Committee on Freight.
Great. So then we'll be hearing from other folks from AASHTO and the consultant team as well as we go forward. I would encourage folks, if you're not speaking, to mute your phone, and we'll go from there. Again, the purpose of today's webinar is to review the draft strategic plan. Everybody's had a chance to look at it, and the comments that we've received have been incorporated, but this is one more opportunity, and also talk a little bit about some upcoming committee events. Next slide, please. Okay, Jeffrey, is this the point where I turn it over to you, or should I talk a little bit about the instructions?
Yeah, I can take it over from here.
Thanks, sir.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jeff Ang-Olson with ICF, and I'm part of a consultant team that was brought on by AASHTO to help with the strategic planning process for this committee and roughly 13 other committees that are new or merged with other committees and therefore have a little more work to do in terms of strategic planning. Before we get into the content of the draft strategic plan, I wanted to say a little about the direction that we were given by AASHTO and how we got here. AASHTO has provided a template for the strategic plan, so if you've had a chance to look at the draft that was circulated, that is following AASHTO's template. This document is a guide for this committee's work for the next 3 to 5 years. And since this is a new committee, this is an important document, important process. The strategic plan is primarily a set of goals, strategies, and action items, and I'll say a little more about those in a minute. As the name implies, it's a strategic plan, so it's not an implementation plan. It does not need to and really should not spell out exactly what the committee is going to do for the next 3 to 5 years. So it can be kind of aspirational. You can think of it kind of as a 3 to 5 year wish list of what you'd like the committee to do. But that said, the final step in this planning process will be development of an action plan that builds on the strategic plan, and that action plan it does really need to be grounded in reality and lay out what the committee can realistically expect to accomplish in the short term. So just keep that in mind. The bullets on this slide were the instructions that AASHTO gave for the committees to develop their strategic plans. They should tie to the goals and strategies included in AASHTO's 5-year plan, and I'll show those on the next slide. We should be reflecting any direction given to us by the Strategic Management Committee and the Board of Directors. It should be consistent with the committee's purpose statement. So if you've had a chance to look at the draft plan, the purpose statement is right up front. And then it should reflect the needs and the opportunities of the member departments. And that's one of the reasons we're having this webinar. So next slide. These are the high-level goals in the AASHTO 5-year plan. So we're trying to be consistent with these. AASHTO's goals are to provide value to members, provide innovative technical and professional services, be a leader in policy development, and communicate the value of transportation. And under those goals, there are some strategies, and if you're interested, that document is up on the AASHTO website. Next slide. And just to refresh your memory, on the new committee structure, you see the Freight Committee in the upper left there, that gray box, part of the Transportation Policy Forum. So this committee reports to the Policy Forum, as do the 6 modal councils. And you see the dotted line there between this committee and then the 4 councils that have a freight role or could have freight issues: water, rail, aviation, and streets and highways. Next slide. We're also being asked to consider the guiding principles that led the AASHTO restructuring process in 2016, and I'm showing those here. I think of particular relevance to this committee is the 3rd bullet, reducing duplication and siloing of committee work, and the 4th bullet, expanded multimodal communication and collaboration. This committee is obviously very multimodal. One of our key roles is to serve as the bridge between modal councils and other committees regarding freight issues, multimodal freight issues. And then the last bullet there, nimbleness. We want to make sure this committee is well positioned to proactively identify and address emerging issues, and I think you'll see that in the draft strategic plan as well. Next slide. So this process started for this committee last summer with the development of the purpose statement, and then we developed the committee's charter, which kind of lays out the organization and leadership and structure of the committee, and that was developed in November or finalized in November. We had a webinar in November on that. We're now developing the strategic plan, which is due this month, and as Ryder said, we pulled together a draft starting with the priorities that were identified by the committee members when we did the survey last fall, and then got some input and feedback from the committee leadership and from also the working group of state DOTs that were involved in developing the purpose statement. And so once we get the full feedback from the committee today, and then you'll be invited to submit any comments afterwards, and we'll finalize the strategic plan. And then the last step, as I mentioned, is the action plan due later this summer. And then I do want to mention a year from now, the committee will have to report out on progress based on that action plan. What has been accomplished in the first year of the committee's full existence. So next slide. So you'll see in the strategic plan that it's primarily, goal, strategy, and action items. So goals are outcome statements that describe the products and services and value the committee will provide. For each goal, there are one or more strategies, which are the specific results the committee hopes to achieve. And then for each strategy, there are one or more action items, which are the specific tasks that the committee will use to implement the strategies. I would ask for your, in terms of your comments, particularly focus on the goals and the strategies. The action items, we're happy to take comments on anything, all 3 of those. The action items will be fleshed out in more detail in the action plan. They're not, I would not say the action items are comprehensive in the draft. But the goals and the strategies, once we finalize those in the strategic plan, those will be the goals and the strategies. So pay particular attention to those. Okay, so next slide. So I'm going to go over each of the goals. There's 6 goals, and I'll go over each of the goals and strategies, and then we'll pause and take comments and questions after each one. But before we do that, I wanted to show you all 6 goals because you won't see them all on one slide. So these are the 6 goals in the draft plan. Goal 1 focuses on improving the planning process, or improving freight transportation planning practices. Goal number 2 focuses on increasing the understanding of emerging technologies and issues. Goal number 3 is improve freight mobility. Goal number 4 relates to supporting community environmental goals. Goal number 5 is inform state DOTs about policy and funding issues. And goal number 6 is developing, supporting policy and related to freight goals. So we'll go over each of those, but before we get into the meat of the strategic plan, why don't we pause and see if there are any high-level questions or comments on the process and the direction we were given before we get into the details. Can we do that?
Sure. At this point, there are no questions, but if there are multiple ways of doing it, you can submit questions using the question box on your screen. There's also an ability where you can raise your hand and I can open up your line and you can ask a question over the phone. Again, at this point, there are no questions.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we reminded people about that. Okay, well then let's go right into the strategic plan. So next slide. So again, goal number one, there's 5 strategies under this goal. So you're seeing the first 2 here. So goal number 1 says, improve freight transportation planning practices through the enhancement of freight data and analytical methods and the dissemination of best practices. And so we've got 5 strategies, and the first strategy focuses on data and analytics. That's something we heard a lot of interest in freight data and freight data analytics during the annual meeting last year in Phoenix, and then also when we did the member survey. So this strategy tries to get at that. It says support the collection, processing, storage, distribution, and analysis of data that enables effective planning and decision-making for freight. And then you can see some of the action items there. Advocate for public-private partnerships, support research around new freight data sources, and also research that addresses some of the deficiencies in the national freight data sets. The second strategy is to share best practices and lessons learned from the development of state freight plans. And this would include best practices around identifying and addressing bottlenecks, prioritizing freight projects, and best practices for how state freight plans can complement or contribute to local and regional plans. Go to the next slide then. So here's the rest of goal number 1. The third strategy says strengthen the capacity of state DOT staff involved in freight planning and decision making. There's a bunch of action items here. I won't read all these, but includes actions for state DOTs, includes private sector collaboration, university partnerships, MPO collaboration. The fourth strategy is to support improved ability to forecast and measure the economic impacts of freight improvements. This is another topic where we heard a lot of interest. A lot of DOTs feel they need a better ability to estimate how freight investments can support their economic development goals. And the last goal there is to strengthen the effectiveness and role of the freight advisory committees. Okay, so why don't we pause there? So that was goal number 1, and see if there are any comments or questions on that.
At this point, there are no questions.
All right, we will keep moving ahead. I should say that this is not your only opportunity to provide comments. We will, after this webinar, we will tell you how to submit comments. So we'll have about a 2-week period where people can send in comments on the draft, and we'll send out some instructions. AASHTO will send out some instructions for how to do that. So don't feel like this is your only opportunity to provide input. Okay, so go on to the next goal. Okay, the second goal is focused on increasing the understanding of emerging technologies and issues related to freight, and understanding particularly their implications for the state DOTs. This goal again, there was a lot of interest through the survey in new technologies and what they mean particularly for state DOT freight planning and operations. Originally, this goal was just focused on technologies, but we had some input that there are other issues like changes in supply chain, logistic practices that might not necessarily be technology specific, but are emerging and might be important or have implications for state DOT. So it's worded now as emerging technologies and issues. And there's 4 strategies under this goal. The first one is to monitor and evaluate the impacts of new technologies, such as connected autonomous vehicles, automated freight delivery systems, and then disseminate that information among the member state DOTs. The second strategy is to foster collaboration and partnerships with private sector stakeholders. So one of the things we might do there is, engage private sector to do presentations at committee meetings, that sort of thing. Next slide. The next strategy, or the third strategy, is to advocate for policies and practices to accommodate rapid changes in supply chains and the need for innovative freight facilities and platforms. And one way that was suggested to do this might be to create a forum or partnership with one or more external organizations that are engaged in supply chain issues. And then the last strategy says support research that leads to better understanding of emerging technologies and issues. So this is a research-focused strategy and an important role of the committee. And one of the action items there would be to coordinate with the TRB freight committees to secure funding on emerging technologies and issues. Okay, so that is the second goal. Are there any comments or questions there?
Still none in the chat box.
All right, we'll keep moving ahead.
All right.
Okay, go to the third goal, the next slide. The third goal reads improve urban, rural, multi-state, and cross-border freight mobility. So this is obviously quite a broad goal. It's, the wording is perhaps broader than the other 5 goals, and there is some overlap. But in pulling this together, there were suggestions for a number of strategies that really did not fall neatly under planning, state freight planning, or not directly related to emerging technologies, the second goal, or environmental community impacts, the fourth goal. So this includes a variety of mobility related strategies so it's a bit of a catch-all. The first strategy here is foster increased collaboration between state DOTs, NPOs, and industry partners. And the action items here are mostly around sharing best practices. The second strategy is related to truck parking. There are, issues there, both urban and rural truck parking issues. So the strategy is to support research, information sharing, and advocacy for improving planning and programming for truck parking. And you can see some of the action items under that strategy. Next slide. The third strategy here is to build and strengthen multi-state corridor coalitions and partnerships. So these are, I think everyone knows what multi-state freight corridor coalitions are, and focuses on strengthening those. And you can see a number of action items related to this. And then the last strategy is to promote improvements in the efficiency of cross-border freight movements. So this is obviously primarily relevant to the state DOTs that are on one of the borders. The action item here is to work with the established border working groups, both on the U.S. and Mexico and Canada borders. Okay. there are no questions. We will keep moving. Next slide.
Hey, Jeffrey, this is Shane. I just had one question if Richard would pop back to that slide. We're talking about the cross-border. I'm wondering if on this we would want to, since we are a freight committee and talking about all modes, if we may want to broaden this language a little bit to include goods that come into ports, because we do have ports all up on the east, west coast, Gulf, and Great Lakes that end up having freight movement issues because goods stay in the port maybe too long, so that may be a topic that we would want to talk about. So I'm not sure if that's addressed here anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think that's specifically addressed. So this could be reworded a bit and focus on, international gateways that would pull in seaports. Anyone have any reaction to that?
This is Roger Millar. I think that's a good idea. Cross-border freight movements, just call it international freight movements, and eliminate the reference to Canada and Mexico because it really is global.
Okay, that's a good comment. All right, let's move on then to the fourth goal. Promote a freight transportation system that supports community and environmental goals. So this relates back to the committee's purpose statement, which, as I mentioned, that's included in the draft strategic plan. And that one of the phrases in that purpose statement is, of special concern will be the relationship between the movement of goods and the natural and built environments, social equity, public health, and the economy. So we're tying back to that purpose statement here with this goal. And there's two strategies under this goal. The first focused on environmental, and the second on kind of community impacts. So strategy 4A is promote environmental sustainability in freight transportation and effective mitigation of adverse impacts. And 4B is support efforts to minimize adverse impacts on communities, including environmental justice considerations. And under both of these, the action items are focusing on sharing of best practices and also supporting new research. So that's goal 4. If you have any comments, go ahead and submit them. All right, hearing none, let's go to goal 5. So this fifth goal is really about keeping the state DOTs informed about policy and funding issues. So it says inform member departments of federal and state regulatory policy and program requirements and funding opportunities related to freight transportation. And there are 4 strategies here. The first one is to monitor freight-related regulations and disseminate that information. The second one is to monitor freight-related funding opportunities and disseminate that information. The third one is continue to foster strong relationships with the freight-related administrations and offices of the U.S. DOT. And the fourth is to foster strong relations with the councils of the AASHTO Policy Forum. I mentioned those earlier, and then other AASHTO committees that are concerned with freight issues. There are certainly other AASHTO committees that touch on freight, and one of the roles of this committee will be to liaison with those. Okay, so that's the 5th goal. And why don't we go then to the last goal? So this is the last goal. So the 5th goal is focused on information sharing. This goal is really focused on shaping policy and relates back to I showed the the four goals of the AASHTO strategic plan. One of them was be a leader in national transportation policy development. So this is more of an advocacy related goal or a proactive kind of outreach. And there are four strategies under this one. The first one is to advocate for federal policies that support state DOT freight related interests. You can see there, some of the areas of interest in the four strategies: efficient freight movements, sustainable funding, safety, environmental impacts, different areas that are related to state DOT interests. Strategy 6B is assist with communicating the value of safe and efficient freight transportation. Again, this relates back to those four goals of the AASHTO strategic plan, one of which is communicate the value of the transportation system. Next slide. The third goal is focused on state level policy primarily, specifically promoting policies like permitting reciprocity that can improve the efficiency of multi-state freight movements. And then the last strategy is primarily focused on local and regional policy, support the preservation of critical freight facilities through local and regional land use policies and decision making. Okay, so that is the entirety of the strategic plan, draft strategic plan, goals, strategies, and action items. And why don't we pause a little bit more and see if there are any questions or comments on anything that I just presented. Okay, people are maybe still digesting this document. Okay, well, if there are no comments or questions, we'll move on. Again, watch for an email, I think probably from Shane Gill at AASHTO, and he'll provide some instructions for how you can send in your comments by email, and we'll give folks about 2 weeks to do that, and then we'll have to finalize the plan later this month. So you can go to the next slide. Actually, I think the next slide. Roger, do you want to talk about the summer meeting, or?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks. Again, this is Roger Millar, Secretary from WASHDOT. I wanted to let you know there is a joint policy conference happening July 17th, 18th, and 19th in Spokane, Washington. The Freight Committee will be meeting on the 18th and 19th. We'll also be having some joint meetings with some of the other committees that are going to be there. I know the Committee on Planning is going to be there, the Committee on Finance is going to be there, the Committee on Sustainability is going to be there, the Committee on Active Transportation, and I don't think that's all of them, but maybe some of the AASHTO staff on the line know who the other committees are. But I wanted to make sure this was on everybody's calendar, and hope to see you in Spokane.
And actually, we do have one question from Bill Gardner. He asks, does the goal listing / number imply goal prioritization?
No, definitely not. There's really no, nothing should be ascribed to the numbering of the goals.
And hey, Bill, this is Shane with AASHTO. So I think, so Jeffrey's exactly right, that this is more of a template as to, kind of what all the committees are following. And really what he mentioned earlier is the next step after the strategic goal will be setting up an action plan. And that's where I think that a prioritization of what can be accomplished in this first year would be where, what we would want to kind of focus more on. But these goals are just kind of put out based on what you guys gave in the feedback and just kind of following the template as to what the overall AASHTO strategic plan is, and then what kind of fell out in what you guys filled out in the survey and then through the comments. But kind of more of the prioritization would happen when we get ready to develop an action plan.
No, that's absolutely right. This is Roger again. The strategic plan has an awful lot in it. We are a volunteer group. We're going to try in the action plan to determine how much work we can bite off and take care of in the first year and what our top priorities should be. So I think it'll be a much smaller and more doable list. So another thing to be thinking about between now and then is what are your priorities that are in the strategic plan? So I don't know if there's another slide after this one.
Yeah, there is one. Yeah, there's one more slide, I guess, about the development of the agenda for the July meeting. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. As we're putting the July meeting together, we had a pre-call to get ready for this webinar. I had a couple of items that we thought of in terms of topics for the committee meeting and speakers at the committee meeting and maybe interactions with other committees. The freight optimization, the work that the Iowa Department of Transportation has done and others, maybe an update on that. Truck parking has become a huge issue around the country, so an update on that. Being in Spokane, in the state of Washington, I want to tap the resources that are nearby at the University of Washington and Washington State and others. So we're looking at reaching out to the Freight Lab to talk about urban freight. And the Washington State DOT and a number of other DOTs in the northern tier are members of the Great Northern Corridor Coalition. So we're thinking about bringing that group in for a presentation. And then, a meeting with the Committee on Planning and the Committee on Sustainability. We're trying to think of which committees should we reach out and talk with while we're all together in July. And in particular, somebody brought up the Active Transportation Committee because we do have a safety issue around the country with a lot of bicycle crashes and fatalities that are interactions with big trucks. So if you on the webinar today have an idea for a topic for the meeting, an idea for a speaker or a group for the meeting, and then some thoughts on joint meetings with other committees that are going to be present in Spokane, please let us know in the next couple of weeks. So the next slide.
And you'll be able, yeah, as I mentioned, AASHTO will send an email out with some instructions for how to provide that input if you're not sure.
Great. Okay, unless there are any other questions from the folks on the line, I wanted to give Caroline an opportunity to say a few words if she chose to, and then we'll wrap it up. So, Caroline, any thoughts for the good of the order?
Not much. I want to emphasize that we do need input from the members, because again, this is a strategic plan that will guide the committee's work for several years to come. So really take some time. Those of you on the webinar and online, please review the document, get us feedback on all the key issue areas. So I think that's what I really want to stress there. And then certainly, I think when we visit in Spokane, if there are any issues that, members want to bring up, I'm not sure when we're going to start working on the action plan, but I think, Roger, this is just a suggestion for Spokane that maybe, we can have some time to brainstorm on fleshing out the action plan.
Yeah, I would think by that time in July, Caroline, we should have at least a first draft of the action plan prepared, and there will be interaction via email with the committee members. But I think a big part of that July meeting is going to be putting some meat on those bones and getting an action plan together in pretty much a final draft form, because it's due to AASHTO in August.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That's it.
Jeff, anything else?
No, nothing from me. Just
Okay. Anything else from our good friends on AASHTO staff?
No, this is Shane with AASHTO, and so be on the lookout from, as Jeffrey mentioned, from an email from me that talks about kind of next steps and the comment period. And I did want to let folks know that we are still looking to replace Caitlin Dwyer as program manager for freight. That hopefully will be taking place in the next few weeks, or an announcement in the next few weeks, and we'll have someone on board for our meeting in Spokane, hopefully way before that, but definitely by that time, so you can meet him or her.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for participating today on the webinar. I hope you got some ideas. You were getting emails from us about we're looking for more input on the draft strategic plan, looking for ideas for the agenda for the July meeting, and looking for your priorities when we take the strategic plan and develop an action plan for the next year or so. Feel free to contact me at any time if you have questions or concerns about what the committee is doing. My email address is millarr@wsdot.wa.gov, and you guys are all adept enough at finding phone numbers that you could probably find mine and give me a call. Anyway, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
glad.
Thank you.